Tonight we step into the dim, smoky warmth of an Elizabethan barber's shop, a place where scissors snip, razors gleam, and someone in the corner might be bleeding just a little too much. The air smells faintly of lye soap and iron, and a fire crackles near the window. You can almost hear the scrape of metal against leather as a blade is honed to a whisper-sharp edge. You probably won't survive this, at least not without losing a pint of blood and a tooth or two. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You sit on a creaky wooden chair while the barber, a wiry man with sleeves rolled high and a grin that says "Trust me, I've done this before," wraps a towel around your neck. In Tudor England, this isn't just a haircut, it's an all-purpose life service. You can get your beard trimmed, your veins drained, your wounds stitched, and, if you're feeling particularly daring, that nagging tooth removed. The barber's shop hums with chatter and the faint rustle of fear. Barbers were the neighborhood multitaskers of the 1500s. A typical day might include shaving a nobleman, applying leeches to a merchant, and then tending a farmer's festering thumb, all before lunch. They were part stylist, part healer, part therapist. In fact, it was one of the few places where commoners and nobles alike sat side by side, bound by the universal need to look respectable and not die from an infection. There's a strange coziness to it, despite the metallic smell of blood and the occasional yelp from a customer. The barber's hands move fast, confident. You can see why people trust him. He knows anatomy better than most priests, even if his education came from trial and error. Historians still argue whether these barbers were true medical pioneers or just well-meaning amateurs with steady hands and good nerves. The barber's chair itself becomes a kind of stage. Locals drop in for gossip, the Elizabethan version of social media. News from the royal court, whispers of plague outbreaks, scandalous romances, everything circulates here between snips of hair and spurts of blood. It's part barbershop, part confessional. If the wooden walls could talk, they'd be banned in polite company. Behind the counter lies a cluttered shelf, a jar of leeches, a pot of lard, a few rusty knives, and a suspiciously dented pair of forceps. One customer insists the barber used those to pull a soldier's molar last week. Quick work, the barber boasts, took him less time than it takes to warm ale. You're not sure whether to be impressed or horrified. Barbers in this period belonged to a half-respected, half-feared class of tradesmen. The clergy had once banned monks from shedding blood, so monasteries outsourced their surgical work to barbers. That's how the profession accidentally wandered into medicine. By Elizabeth's reign, they were doing everything short of organ transplants. It's a curious overlap, religion, grooming, and surgery. And you can't help but picture a monk in a tonsure sitting quietly while a barber tries not to sneeze mid-incision. You notice the striped pole outside, turning lazily in the wind. Red and white, painted in fading strokes. It's not just decoration, it's a coded advertisement. The red stands for blood, the white for the bandages used afterward. And the brass basin at its top? That represents the bowl used to collect it. A cheerful symbol for a time when most people thought bloodletting cured everything from fevers to bad moods. The barber finishes a shave, wipes his hands on a cloth that might once have been white, and gestures for the next customer. You catch his wink as he says, "Mind the stool, it's still damp from the last fellow." A joke, you hope. He's already mixing a poultice of egg white and vinegar to soothe razor burn, or perhaps a small cut from earlier. Barbers often played chemist too, whipping up salves, powders, and tonics from whatever herbs they could find, or afford. There's a rhythm to the work, a blend of showmanship and care. The barber's hands dance between blades and bottles, each motion practiced, efficient. You wonder if he ever rests. In truth, the barber's life is one of constant motion. always in demand, always slightly on edge. After all, one slip could turn a haircut into a crime scene. Outside, a crowd gathers for the latest street proclamation. News travels fast when your customers carry half the city's gossip. A wealthy merchant boasts in complaining of a throbbing molar, clutching his jaw like a man who's been cursed. The barber sighs, rolls up his sleeves again, and mutters, "Well, if I must." The poor fellow sits, sweating, as the barber reaches for those same dented forceps. You decide you've seen enough, for now. But as you step outside into the noisy London street, you glance back through the window and realize something odd. This strange, bloody little shop is one of the few places in Elizabethan England where science, superstition, and style all meet in one barber's steady hands. The razor flashes once more under the firelight. You can almost hear the scrape, the whisper of steel, and the quiet murmur of a man who believes, utterly, that he can cure the world, one shave at a time. The red and white pole outside the shop keeps spinning in the wind, catching the last light of a London afternoon. It looks harmless, almost festive, like a candy cane's grim ancestor. But that pole tells a story of blood, ambition, and a marketing strategy that's somehow stuck for centuries. You pause beside it, the painted colors flaking, and imagine the generations who've stood here before you, clutching bandaged arms or empty mouths. See, that pole isn't just decoration, it's the origin story of an entire profession. The barber's pole began as an actual instrument of work. In the old days, patients, or victims, depending on how you look at it, were told to grip a pole to keep their veins visible while the barber made a neat incision for bloodletting. The white bandages used to clean and wrap the wounds were later hung out to dry, twisting in the breeze and spiraling around the pole. Eventually, someone decided to paint those colors on permanently. The result? A sign that shouted, "Come in, I'll make you bleed, professionally." It's a little dark when you think about it, but also undeniably clever branding. You've got to admire their commitment. Historians still argue whether the blue stripe, sometimes added later, especially in America, was meant to symbolize veins or patriotism. Either way, the thing stuck. To this day, that rotating candy stripe remains one of the most enduring medical relics of the Renaissance. Inside the shop, the barber doesn't seem to give it much thought. To him, the pole is just an announcement that he's open for business. It's the Elizabethan equivalent of a neon "We do everything" sign. Need a shave? A tooth pulled? A blister lanced? Here's your man. It's not so much false advertising as ambitious multitasking. And given that the average Elizabethan doctor charged a fortune, or worse, lived 2 towns away, the barber's blade was the more practical choice. Tonight, the pole creaks gently as the wind changes direction, and you find yourself watching it spiral like a hypnotic clock. Maybe that's part of its charm, a reassuring swirl that says, "Step inside, we've been doing this forever." You duck back into the shop to escape a drizzle of London rain. The barber looks up from sharpening his blade on a leather strop, humming a tune that's either cheerful or deeply foreboding. Behind him, the tools of the trade gleam, razors, scissors, hooks, and a small wooden box containing the most treasured of all instruments, a pair of forceps. He notices you staring and grins. "Fine pole out there, eh? Been repainting it every spring since my father's time." He says it with pride, as if it were a family crest. It's strange to think that this simple symbol, now quaint and decorative, once meant survival. In a world where the 4 humors, blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, were believed to rule human health, bloodletting was thought to balance the body. Feeling sluggish? Too melancholic? Perhaps you had excess blood. The barber would gladly fix that, with a quick nick and a prayer. One story goes that some barbers even bled patients in rhythm with church bells, timing the draining to coincide with sacred hours. Others kept buckets ready, polished and labeled, because losing too much blood was an actual occupational hazard for both parties. You imagine the pole outside catching the scent of iron and salt from 100 such sessions, a monument to the strange logic of medieval medicine. Of course, this was also the age of performance. Everything in Elizabethan London had a hint of theatre, even medical treatment. The barber's pole, with its bright, spiraling lines, worked like an advertisement that needed no words. When people saw it, they knew what awaited inside, both the pain and the possibility of relief. It's marketing born of necessity, centuries before anyone coined the term brand identity. The barber chuckles as he wraps a bandage around a man's arm. Funny thing, he says, people think the pole's red for beauty. But it's blood, plain and simple. Then he winks, adding, still, makes a nice sight on a foggy day. There's a kind of honesty in that, the unapologetic mingling of the gruesome and the aesthetic. You realize the Elizabethans didn't separate beauty from medicine the way modern people do. To them, a clean cut and a neat bandage were beautiful. It meant order restored, chaos controlled. And maybe that's why the pole endures. It's not just a relic, it's a symbol of humanity's stubborn optimism. Every stripe is a story, red for the pain we risk, white for the healing we hope for, and the gentle spin for time passing, as one generation hands its razors and fears to the next. Outside, the rain stops. The street glows faintly under torches, and the pole catches a glimmer of reflected light. Somewhere nearby, a drunk sailor laughs too loudly, a lute plays half a song, and the city exhales. You run a hand along the smooth wood of the pole, tracing the red spiral. It's strangely comforting, even if you know what it stands for. You wonder how many people over the centuries have done the same: nervous patients, hopeful customers, curious children. The barber steps outside, wiping his hands, and says, "Still there, eh? She's older than me, that one." He taps the pole affectionately, then adds with a grin, "And prettier too." He's joking, but you can hear a flicker of reverence beneath it. In a way, the pole is his partner, his silent assistant, his calling card. It spins endlessly as if reminding everyone who passes that in this city, pain and care, blood and laughter, have always been bound together. As you walk away, you glance back one more time. The pole gleams faintly in the torchlight, and for a moment, it looks alive, turning, pulsing, breathing history. A barber's legacy made visible, a spiral that still hasn't stopped. By the time dawn stretches its pale fingers over the thatched rooftops, you've wandered far enough from the barber's pole to find yourself on a crowded Elizabethan street where everyone seems to be chewing something and grimacing. It doesn't take long to realize that toothache is practically a national pastime. Every face tells a story of sweet indulgence gone wrong. England, in Elizabeth's day, is obsessed with sugar, and it's about to pay the price in molars. You pass a baker dusting honey across warm bread, a vendor hawking candied almonds, and a merchant boasting that his imported real Caribbean sugar, white as snow and twice as dangerous. See, sugar was the luxury that trickled down the social ladder. The rich devoured it in everything from pies to tooth powders, while the poor scraped by with cheap ale and sweetened bread. By the late 1500s, even Queen Elizabeth herself was said to have blackened teeth from her sweet tooth. Courtiers, desperate to imitate her, began darkening their own teeth on purpose. Fashion, it seems, has always been just a little bit painful. You watch a boy bite into a toffee and instantly regret it. His mother tuts, then sends him sprinting toward, where else? The barber's shop. It's a strange thought, that the same man who trims beards also tackles cavities. But in a world without anesthetic, antibiotics, or toothpaste, options are limited. Barbers weren't just convenient, They were trusted. They already handled razors and bleeding bowls. How much worse could a tooth be? Well, plenty worse. The average Elizabethan diet was a dentist's nightmare. Without modern brushing, plaque built up faster than gossip at court. Bread was often ground with flour containing tiny bits of stone from the millstones, wearing teeth down to stumps. Add to that a steady stream of ale, safer than water but full of fermenting sugars, and you get a mouth that's both a banquet and a battlefield. Historians still argue whether the poor suffered more from decay or the wealthy from indulgence. Either way, nobody came out smiling. You duck under an archway where two men argue about whose tooth extraction hurt less last week. One swears by whiskey as a numbing agent. The other insists on biting a wooden spoon. Did the barber say anything? You ask. Aye, says the first man grimly. He said, "Hold still, or I'll get the hammer." Then he laughs, revealing a proud gap where his molar used to be. Despite the suffering, toothaches were weirdly social. People compared remedies like recipes. Cloves pressed into the gums, vinegar gargles, or, for the truly adventurous, drops of mercury. Some even rubbed their teeth with powdered coral or burned rosemary. And because superstition never slept, others swore by whispering charms to the moon, or burying a pulled tooth in the garden to prevent its ghost from haunting your jaw. Yes, really. The Elizabethans took dental folklore quite literally. You walk past a tavern where the smell of stale beer wafts out, and you realize that alcohol was both the problem and the solution. It rotted teeth but also dulled pain, at least until someone had the bright idea to pour spirits directly into an open socket. Somewhere in London, a future dentist just winced. Inside another barber's shop, you hear a customer begging for help. The barber wipes his hands, inspects the man's mouth, and says, "Aye, it's loose enough." He grips the tooth with iron pliers and, with a grunt that sounds like divine effort, yanks it free. The man howls, spits blood into a bowl, and then, because humans are endlessly adaptable, thanks him. You can't help but think, that's trust, or perhaps just resignation dressed as gratitude. It's easy to forget that in Elizabeth's time, dentistry wasn't a formal field. It was an improvisation. Some barbers even collected pulled teeth to study, or reuse. There are recorded cases of replacement teeth being hammered in, sometimes carved from bone, sometimes taken from other donors. The less you think about that, the better your dreams will be tonight. Still, amid the pain and bizarre treatments, there's a touch of tenderness. Many barbers genuinely cared about easing suffering. They might apply warm compresses, mix herbal poultices, or simply offer kind words. For all their crude tools, their bedside manner often beat that of professional surgeons. The barber might not have known why teeth decayed, but he understood that pain deserved attention, and that alone made him indispensable. You pause by a wooden stall selling toothpicks of silver and bone, a fashionable accessory for the well-to-do. A pamphlet claims they preserve the freshness of one's breath. A lie, most likely, but an elegant one. You almost buy one for the novelty, until you remember that Elizabethans also cleaned their teeth with soot and salt. Best to keep your modern mouthwash. In the background, a preacher's voice rises from a nearby square. Beware vanity. Sweetmeats are the devil's bait. People laugh, but he's not wrong. The sugary revolution has made England's smiles a little darker. Yet for all the decay, you sense something human in it. The willingness to enjoy pleasure even when it hurts. As you make your way back toward the Thames, you pass another barber preparing his morning trade. He hangs a fresh towel, sharpens his blade, and sets out his tools. You can almost hear him humming. The pole spins lazily beside him, the red stripe bright against the dawn. Somewhere inside, a kettle whistles, ready to sterilize, or at least warm, the instruments of salvation. You realize the barber isn't just trimming hair or fixing smiles. He's part of the city's heartbeat. In a world where every indulgence has a price, he's the one who collects the debt in enamel and blood. You can almost hear the rhythm of it, the snip, the scrape, the pull, and it's weirdly soothing. Maybe that's why you stay a moment longer, letting the sound of London's waking streets mix with the barber's calm efficiency. Toothaches will come and go, but the barber? He's eternal. You return to the barber's shop later that day, curious, and maybe a little morbid, to see what happens when grooming gives way to dentistry. The familiar scent of soap and singed hair lingers, but there's a new edge in the air tonight. Fear, muffled under nervous laughter. A merchant slumps in the chair, clutching his jaw, while the barber examines a set of pliers that look better suited for blacksmithing than medicine. "Hold still," he says, rolling up his sleeves with a casualness that would terrify a modern patient. "It's only a moment's work." The man nods, pale as parchment. There's no anesthetic, no sterile gloves, just the firm conviction that a good yank and a clean cloth can solve almost anything. You watch as the barber leans in, his breath steady, his grip certain. The pliers glint like a villain's grin in candlelight. Then, one sharp twist, a crack, and a gasp that could be heard 2 doors down. The barber holds up the tooth like a trophy. The crowd cheers. Yes, there's a crowd. Because in the 16th century, a tooth extraction is not just a procedure. It's a performance. People peek through the door, fascinated and horrified in equal measure. "Bravo!" someone shouts. The barber bows, winks, and drops the tooth into a tin cup with a clink that feels almost ceremonial. For all its brutality, this moment is pure theater. Barbers understood something that modern dentists lost when they switched to white coats and music: the value of spectacle. The Elizabethan customer expected to be entertained while suffering. Pain and pride went hand in hand. A fine pull, the merchant groans, dabbing his mouth with a rag. Worth every penny. He hands over a coin, maybe 2, then limps out with the swagger of a man who's survived something heroic. Barbers, you realize, were masters of illusion as much as incision. They played their part with charisma. The instruments were polished. The aprons, sometimes, were clean. A mirror gleamed in the corner, a sign of sophistication, while herbs hung from the rafters to disguise the metallic tang of blood. And always, that smile. The barber's grin said, "Trust me, I've done worse things successfully." Historians still argue whether these barbers were pioneers of oral surgery or opportunists capitalizing on public pain. Either way, they filled a desperate gap in society. Surgeons were too few and too expensive, physicians, too theoretical. But the barber was nearby, affordable, and, most importantly, confident. And in the absence of anesthesia, confidence was half the cure. You take a closer look at the tools scattered on his bench: a pair of long-handled tooth drawers, a wedge-like instrument called a pelican, and something ominously labeled a key. The pelican, shaped like a bird's beak, was used to clamp the tooth before prying it from its socket, usually with a sound best described as memorable. The key worked like a corkscrew, twisting until the tooth popped free. If that sounds excruciating, well, it was. But the barber's speed often made the difference between agony and quick relief. A small boy stands nearby, watching with awe. "You'll learn this one day," the barber says, tousling his hair. "A steady hand, and the world will always need you." The boy nods solemnly, as if being knighted. It's strange, but in that moment, you can see how this tradition survives, not through science, but through apprenticeship and pride. The barber cleans the tools with a splash of ale, sanitation, Elizabethan style, then sets them back on the shelf beside a row of teeth in tiny jars. Some are oddly shaped, others look disturbingly human still. but they all sparkle faintly in the firelight. For study, he says, though you suspect he also keeps them as proof of skill. Every trade has its trophies. Outside, the city hums with evening energy. Vendors shout, horses clatter, and the Thames laps against the docks. Inside, the barber hums tunelessly as he tidies up, humming the way people do after something difficult is done well. You can't help but feel a flicker of admiration. For all the gore and guesswork, this man has given people something raw in his time, relief. There's even a touch of modernity in his work. You notice he tilts his patient's head back just so, using a wooden wedge to keep the mouth open, a technique that wouldn't look out of place in a contemporary dental chair. Progress, it seems, often begins with someone too stubborn to stop experimenting. Still, it's not without mishap. One old woman limps in complaining that her neighbor's barber pulled the wrong one. The barber shakes his head sympathetically. Amateurs, he mutters. You must choose your torturer carefully. You laugh despite yourself, then realize he isn't entirely joking. There's a rhythm to his workday. Shave, bleed, pull, repeat. It's part medical, part ritual, part survival. And though the instruments look crude, his control is anything but. You can see that in the way he steadies his wrist before every motion, the way he listens to the faint click before a tooth gives way. These are small signs of mastery, earned one patient at a time. He wipes his hands, finally sitting back with a sigh. You know, he says, folks think pulling teeth is the worst part. But I rather like it. There's honesty in it. You take the pain out, and you see it, right there, in your hand. Proof you've done some good today. You don't argue. There's something humbling about that philosophy, even if your stomach's still twisting from the sound of that earlier crack. As you step outside, dusk settles over London. The barber's pole glows faintly in torchlight, its red stripes almost pulsing. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls. You glance back through the doorway one last time. The barber stands there, arms crossed, watching the street, half healer, half showman, bathed in the same flickering light that glints off his tools. It's strange to think how much trust people have placed in men like him. But then again, maybe it's not so strange at all. Pain makes believers of everyone eventually. By morning, the streets are alive with noise and spectacle. Hawkers shout the day's bargains, musicians clash lutes and drums, and through it all, a strange crowd gathers near Cheapside's open square. You follow the noise and find what might be described as London's answer to a traveling dentist, a man in a bright doublet, a feathered hat, and the unshakable confidence of someone who pulls teeth for applause. He's an itinerant tooth drawer, one of those wandering showmen who make their living on shock, skill, and luck. His cart is painted with crude drawings of smiling faces, each one missing a few strategic teeth. A small drumbeat announces the start of the show. Step up, he cries. Relieve your pain, reclaim your smile, and astonish your friends. His assistant, a wiry boy barely in his teens, waves a pair of glinting forceps like a sword. You can't help but smile. It's absurd and a little tragic, but also deeply Elizabethan. Everything in this era, even suffering, comes with a touch of performance. The tooth drawer bows theatrically, then points to a trembling man from the crowd. You, good sir. A brave face today and peace tonight. The crowd cheers. A few coins change hands. The man sits on a wooden stool, pale and sweating. No one mentions sterilization, largely because no one knows what that is yet. Instead, the tooth drawer dips his instrument in wine, wipes it on his sleeve, and begins a prayer that sounds suspiciously like a sales pitch. One quick jerk later, the crowd gasps and laughs in equal measure. The tooth, still bloody, is raised high for everyone to see. Behold, he shouts. Another victory for modern medicine. The assistant beats the drum again, and the audience erupts in cheers. It's part healing, part theater, part carnival. You can't decide whether you're watching medicine or street magic. Historians still argue whether these itinerant tooth drawers were genuine practitioners or just showmen exploiting the desperate. Some did have training from barber guilds, but many were simply opportunists, musicians, tinkers, or failed surgeons who discovered that pulling teeth paid better than honesty. They roamed from town to town, leaving trails of aching gums and mixed reviews. One chronicler wrote that the best of them could draw a tooth with such dexterity that the sufferer scarce knew it gone. The worst, however, needed 3 men to hold the patient and a 4th to fetch the ale. It's safe to say the experience varied. You edge closer. The tooth drawer wipes sweat from his brow and gestures grandly to the next volunteer, a woman clutching her jaw, grimacing through courage. He offers her a sip of something strong, perhaps wine or brandy, and murmurs, "For bravery." Then, with a flourish, he extracts the offending molar in a single, brutal twist. She screams once, sharp and brief, and then, astonishingly, smiles. The crowd erupts again, some cheering, others cringing. A passing nobleman tosses a coin, amused. The tooth drawer catches it mid-air and bows deeply. "Another happy patron," he cries, "and not a drop of blood wasted." Which, of course, isn't true. There's plenty of blood, but the show must go on. Theatrics aside, these traveling barbers filled an essential gap in public health. In towns without surgeons or physicians, their arrival was a small miracle. For a few pennies, you could be rid of weeks of agony. The tooth drawer didn't just trade in pain, he traded in relief. And in a world where medical options were scarce, that made him a hero of sorts. Still, not everyone was impressed. The more established barber surgeons in London grumbled that these itinerants tarnished their reputation. Guild records from the late 1500s mention repeated complaints about wandering tooth pullers of no training. The tension between the formal and the freelance was already brewing. One guild member even proposed that traveling barbers should wear distinctive badges, so the ignorant might avoid them. Ironically, the public didn't seem to care. They loved a good show too much. You watch as the tooth drawer dips his instruments back into a jug of wine, hums a tune, and pockets his earnings. His assistant displays the extracted teeth on a small velvet cloth, as if they were gemstones. For the curious, he calls out, "The trophies of courage." A few children giggle, one faints. The crowd applauds again. Behind the laughter, though, there's something more poignant. Each tooth represents a moment of trust, someone choosing hope over fear, or at least one kind of pain over another. You think of the barber in his shop, methodical and steady, and realize that these showmen are his restless cousins, born of the same impulse to heal, or at least to help. When the performance ends, the crowd disperses slowly, chatting and comparing stories. The tooth drawer tips his hat to you as you pass. "You've fine teeth, my friend," he says with a grin. "But if ever they trouble you, look for the red cart. I'll make you smile again, one way or another." You laugh nervously and keep walking. The sun dips low, washing the square in amber light. The air smells faintly of sawdust and sweat. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolls 6 times. You turn once more to see the tooth drawer packing up his instruments, humming as he goes. His assistant carries the velvet cloth of teeth carefully, like a holy relic. It strikes you then how thin the line is between healer and performer, between miracle and mistake. The itinerant tooth drawer may not have had credentials, but he had faith, in himself, in his audience, and in the strange alchemy of pain turned to relief. As the last of the crowd fades into the winding streets, you realize the barber's trade is spreading, evolving. The profession is learning to travel, to entertain, to adapt. The red and white pole now has wheels. Night falls softly over London Bridge. You cross it slowly, watching torches flicker along the parapets and listening to the rhythmic splash of the Thames below. On the far bank, the Southwark inns are alive with laughter, drink, and song. Beyond them, hidden among the alleys, wait the barbers who never joined the guild, the ones who cut hair by candlelight and learned to let the shadows cover what the law could not. You push through the door of one such shop. It's a narrow room, barely lit by a tallow candle. The air smells of smoke, oil, and something metallic. The barber here is no guild member. He's a freelancer, an outlaw craftsman plying his trade among sailors, thieves, and dock workers. He looks up from his stool, eyes sharp but kind. "Evening," he says. His accent isn't London, maybe Norfolk, maybe Kent. You notice his hands, rough, scarred, steady. He wears no apron, only a dark tunic with the sleeves rolled high. The tools on his table gleam faintly: shears, razors, pincers, even a small curved knife for bloodletting. Each one looks both ancient and purposeful. He gestures for you to sit. "Not much coin in hair tonight," he mutters, "but plenty in heads." You hesitate before realizing he means headaches, the kind cured by a careful cut behind the ear and a few ounces of blood. He talks as he works, voice low and steady, like a priest reciting liturgy. "See, the guild men up north of the river think they own the art," he says. "But truth is, the best learning's done here, among the poor. You want steady hands? Cut sailors. You want patience? Cut drunkards. You want gratitude? Cut a man who's been in pain for a week." You watch the red stream trickle into a small pewter bowl. The candlelight dances over it. The barber hums softly as he wipes his blade. It's the same tune you heard earlier from the tooth drawer, a melody that seems to follow the profession itself, from shop to street to slum. "Blood's a river," he says. "Too much, a man drowns. Too little, he sickens. My job's to keep it flowing." He tilts the bowl thoughtfully, then pours it into a basin beside him. There's no sense of horror here. Just routine. Care. Precision. You notice a crude wooden sign nailed to the door frame: hair, beards, teeth, and cures. Fair prices, quiet hands. Beneath it, a smaller inscription scratched in charcoal reads, "No questions." This kind of barber, ungilded, unsupervised, was common across London's poorer quarters. Officially, they were illegal. Unofficially, they were indispensable. Guild members treated nobles and merchants. These men treated everyone else. When a sailor came in with a cracked jaw, or a wharf boy limped in with a rusty nail wound, the Southwark barber didn't ask for letters of recommendation. He just reached for his knife and did what he could. You think about how medicine often begins, not in universities, but in corners like this. A room with poor light, a man with rough hands, and a desperate patient. Science will come later. For now, there's only instinct and experience. He finishes his work, binds the small wound behind your ear with a strip of linen, and nods approvingly. "You'll sleep well tonight," he says. "Pain always finds the quiet spots." You hand him a few pennies, and he waves off one. "Keep it. For luck." Outside, the air is cool and damp. A fog has risen off the Thames, muffling the sound of bells. You look back once and see the faint glow of his candle through the window. A single point of light in a city of shadows. Further down the street, you spot another sign swaying in the wind, a painted pole of red and white, lit from below by a hanging lantern. This barber's shop is larger, brighter, and clearly part of the guild. Inside, 3 apprentices are trimming hair while their master oversees a man having a wart burned off with a heated iron. The smell of singed flesh mixes with rosemary and oil. The contrast between the two shops feels stark. Order versus improvisation, ritual versus survival. Yet both serve the same purpose, tending to the living body with steel and nerve. You stand at the doorway, unnoticed, and listen. The master barber is lecturing his apprentices. Remember, lads, a clean blade and a steady hand make a gentleman. A trembling hand makes a corpse. The boys laugh nervously, nodding. He continues, and never forget the pole, red for blood, white for bandage. The world should know what we offer before they step inside. That pole again, symbol and advertisement, history and warning. Even now, it turns slowly in the wind, a spiral of promise and danger. You think of all the barbers across England, the polished guild members in their fine coats, the traveling tooth drawers with their drums, the Southwark outlaws with their candles and bowls. Together, they form an invisible network of care, chaos, and courage. Medicine may still belong to the scholars, but healing belongs to them. A sudden commotion breaks your thoughts. Two men boast from a nearby tavern, one clutching his arm, the other laughing drunkenly. Blood drips between his fingers. "'Tis but a scratch," he insists. The crowd parts, and the Southwark barber appears from the fog, calm as ever, cloth and basin in hand. He says nothing, just kneels, examines the wound, and begins to clean it. Around him, the city keeps roaring, bells tolling, merchants shouting, horses clattering. But in that small circle of light, the noise fades. You realize that in this noisy, violent, beautiful London, the barber is one of the few who brings stillness. As you cross back over the bridge, you glance down at the river again. It gleams faintly in the moonlight, dark, alive, unstoppable. Like the barber's trade itself, always flowing, always adapting, finding its way between the stones. Morning comes slowly, heavy with mist and the faint brine of the Thames. You wake to the sound of a street crier shouting something about a cure for all manner of agues and vapors. His voice drifts through the window like an early sermon. Curious, you step outside and follow it through the crooked alleys until you find a small wooden cart piled high with jars, bottles, and bundles of herbs. The seller is a barber. You can tell by the crimson streaks on his smock and the tiny razor charm dangling from his belt. But he's not shaving anyone today. No, today he's a healer, hawking remedies to whoever will listen. "Good morning, my fine folk," he calls. For toothache, a dab of vinegar and salt. For melancholy, a sip of mercury water. And for the ill-humoured, well, that one may take a prayer. You linger nearby, pretending to inspect a jar of thick yellow paste. It smells like mustard and vinegar, strong enough to make your eyes water. Mustard plaster, the barber explains proudly. Brings the blood to the surface, drives out the sickness. Works faster than any physician's powder. You nod politely but glance at the other jars, one labeled mercury ointment, another goose grease balm. A third, mysteriously, simply reads elixir of teeth. The barber catches your look and grins. "Ah, that one's special," he says. "A touch of alum, a bit of spirit, a whisper of magic. Keeps your gums firm and your breath sweet. Or close enough." You can't help but chuckle. It's absurd, but then again, so was half of Elizabethan medicine. Back then, the line between barber, apothecary, and alchemist was blurry. If you had the tools, the nerve, and a little imagination, you could sell nearly anything as a cure. He picks up a silver vial and shakes it gently, the contents shimmering like molten metal. "Mercury water," he says reverently. "They call it quicksilver. The substance of the moon, flowing yet eternal. Rub it on your sores and feel reborn." He doesn't mention that it might also make you tremble, drool, and slowly lose your mind. Mercury was a fashionable medicine in Tudor times. Physicians prescribed it for everything from headaches to syphilis. Barbers, eager to compete, sold cheaper, stronger versions from behind their chairs. It was poisonous, yes, but it worked just enough to be believable. People wanted miracles, and barbers were happy to sell them by the spoonful. Historians still argue whether these barbers believed in their own concoctions or simply played along for profit. Maybe it was both. Faith and opportunism make comfortable bedfellows, especially when wrapped in parchment and sealed with wax. You wander further down the street, where another barber's shop emits a different sort of perfume: rosemary, lavender, and smoke. Inside, the shelves are lined with dried herbs bundled in twine. A young apprentice grinds something in a mortar while his master stirs a pot over a brazier. Poultice for tooth abscess, the barber murmurs. Onion and salt. Draws out the rot. He wipes his hands on his apron and peers at you. You a sufferer? He asks. You shake your head, but curiosity gets the better of you. Why onions? He shrugs. Because onions make men cry, and crying cleanses the head. You can't tell whether he's joking. He goes on to explain that each ingredient carries meaning: mustard to heat the blood, vinegar to purge the bile, salt to preserve the flesh. It's all based on the humoral theory, the idea that health depends on the balance of four fluids: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Too much or too little of any, and the body revolts. In that world, medicine was poetry, equal parts philosophy, superstition, and luck. If the stars were right, your cure worked. If not, you tried again tomorrow. Outside, a woman in fine silk passes by holding a perfumed cloth to her nose. Another quack, she mutters. But she still glances back once, just in case he truly does have something that might stop her headaches. That's the paradox of this era: doubt and hope sharing the same street. Later, you stop by a riverside tavern for a drink. The barkeep sets down your mug and says, "Watch what you buy from barbers. Heard one near Cheapside made a man glow like the moon before he died." You laugh, thinking it a joke. Glow. The barkeep nods gravely. Mercury, they said. Shining skin. Shaking hands. Poor fool thought he'd caught heaven's light. You remember the quicksilver vial and shudder. Still, there's something almost romantic about it: the barber's belief that the world's poisons might also be its cures. That somewhere between death and healing lies a narrow space where craft becomes faith. You return to the street as the day fades. The barbers are closing shop, sweeping hair and herbs into the gutters. A faint wind carries the mingled smells of blood, vinegar, and rose oil, sweet, sharp, unforgettable. As you pass a barber locking his door, he nods politely. "Evening," he says. "Need a tincture for sleep?" You smile. "No, thank you." He winks. "Suit yourself. Though dreams have ailments too." The remark lingers as you walk away. Perhaps that's what the barber's trade truly was: a kind of dream work, balancing life and illusion one bottle at a time. In a world without antibiotics or anesthesia, sometimes belief itself was the best medicine available. Behind you, the barber's candle flickers out. The last thing you see before the dark claims the street is that ever-present pole, red, white, and now, under the moonlight, a hint of silver. The next morning, sunlight pours through a misty haze, glinting off the gilded spires of Whitehall. You follow the sound of hoofbeats and chatter to a bustling courtyard where servants rush about with trays of linen, wine, and, oddly, small pewter bowls. The air smells faintly of cloves, honey, and something sour beneath it, something like decay. This isn't a barber's lane anymore. You've wandered into the orbit of royalty. And here, of all things, You're about to learn how the mighty suffered the same dental horrors as the poor, only with more ceremony and less sense. A herald strides past, shouting orders, while a young woman in a lace ruff whispers to a servant, "Fetch more rose water. Her Majesty will not bear the stench." You pause, realizing she means Queen Elizabeth herself, the Virgin Queen, the glittering icon of English power. Her portraits show a woman flawless and serene, every tooth a pearl. But you're about to find out that the truth behind that regal smile was anything but pearly. You edge closer to the inner chamber, where the Queen's private barber surgeon waits beside a chair cushioned in crimson velvet. His hands tremble slightly as he arranges gleaming tools on a silver tray: pliers, scrapers, swabs, and a small iron rod for cautery. "Careful," he mutters to his apprentice. "Her Majesty's nerves are frayed enough without seeing too much iron." When Elizabeth appears, her face is pale beneath its mask of white lead makeup. Her lips are thin, pressed tight, and her jaw trembles faintly when she speaks. "Begin," she says simply. The barber bows deeply. You watch as he tilts her head gently, murmuring reassurances. The Queen's jaw opens, revealing teeth darkened by years of sugared confections and sweet wines. Sugar had become a royal indulgence, a mark of sophistication imported from the New World. But with every candied violet and honeyed fig, her enamel had surrendered a little more. By her later years, chronic pain haunted her smile. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth truly lost most of her teeth or merely suffered recurrent abscesses hidden by clever paint and padding. What's certain is that her courtiers began to imitate her speech patterns, tight-lipped, mumbled, to conceal their own decaying mouths. Power, it seemed, came with a price paid in toothache. The barber dips a rag in rose water and dabs her gums. "Majesty, the swelling is less than last week," he says. She exhales through her nose, half grateful, half irritated. "Then let us keep it so. I've no mind to yelp like a common girl." He nods, then opens a small jar of clove oil, one of the few reliable anesthetics available at the time. The sharp, spicy scent fills the chamber. "Hold fast, Your Grace." He presses a cloth soaked in the oil to the inflamed gum. The Queen's eyes close. For a moment, the mighty ruler of England becomes simply a woman enduring pain, trying to appear unshaken before her servants. Outside, a court musician strums a lute, his melody soft and mournful. You find yourself almost lulled, until the barber gives a quick twist of the wrist, and the Queen's body stiffens. A faint metallic sound, then silence. He holds up the tooth like a trophy. It's black at the root, the gum tissue clinging to it in pale threads. She exhales slowly, then says, "Burn it." He does so immediately, dropping it into the brazier where it hisses and curls in smoke. "Let no relic of weakness remain," she whispers. The ritual feels both intimate and grim. Here is monarchy stripped bare, not gold and glory, but the frail machinery beneath the crown. Afterward, the barber mixes a rinse of vinegar, salt, and mint leaves. "Swish, Majesty," he says. She obeys, grimacing. Then, with that peculiar Tudor resilience, she straightens and says, "Now fetch my wig. There is counsel yet to face." You slip away before the next servant bows. Outside, the court hums again with gossip, how Her Majesty braved her ailment, how her patience outshone the pain. The barber, wiping his tools, overhears and smiles faintly. He knows the truth. Bravery and vanity often share a chair. Later, you visit another noble household near Fleet Street. The lady of the house reclines beneath a lace canopy while her personal barber fusses over her face with powders and cloths. "My lady, you grind your teeth in sleep," he says, examining her jaw. She sighs dramatically. "I dream of suitors, and wake with none. No wonder my teeth protest." Her remedy? A mixture of ground coral and vinegar, rubbed on the gums until they bled slightly, believed to restore vitality. It probably restored pain instead. But the idea of beauty through suffering was as fashionable as pearls. Even the playwrights took note. In one of Shakespeare's lesser-known jests, a character quips, "A barber hath more teeth in his bowl than in his own head." It was true enough. Barbers kept their extracted teeth in jars, using them as samples for replacement sets. Some were even re-implanted into wealthy clients' mouths, a primitive version of dentures. A second-hand smile, bought from a stranger. As dusk falls, you stroll along the Strand, thinking of the Queen's clenched jaw, her courtiers' sweetened breath, and the barbers who kept them all presentable. Beneath the glamour, the Elizabethan court was just as mortal as the rest of England, aching, bleeding, rotting quietly behind velvet curtains. And through it all, the barbers endured, half servants, half magicians, always close enough to touch the crown, yet never part of it. They could trim a beard, pull a tooth, or staunch a wound, but they would never be invited to dine at the table they kept polished and pain-free. As the palace bells toll vespers, you glance back one last time. The window of the Queen's chamber glows faintly, and for a moment you imagine her smiling, not the painted portrait smile, but something gentler, relieved. Somewhere behind her curtain, a barber packs his tools, washes his hands in rose water, and whispers a quiet prayer for steadier ones tomorrow. The city grows quieter as evening spreads its blue-gray shawl over the rooftops, but not for long. From across the river, a distant argument rolls through the air, hoarse voices, sharp words, the unmistakable sound of men disputing who holds the right to slice open whom. You follow the sound to a guildhall lit by sputtering lanterns. Outside hangs a wooden sign, carved with two hands, one gripping a razor, the other a scalpel. Beneath it reads, "The Worshipful Company of Barbers and Surgeons." The air inside crackles with tension. You step into a room full of quills, ledgers, and red-faced men in aprons. At the center, a man in velvet, a surgeon, clearly, pounds the table. "We are not mere haircutters," he shouts. "We study anatomy, dissection, and the art of healing. We do not gossip while scraping beards." A barber across the table slams his fist down, rattling an inkpot. "And we, good sir, are not butchers. We bleed a man to save his life. We pull teeth with steadier hands than your trembling clerks." The crowd murmurs in agreement. You can almost taste the rivalry in the air, part pride, part desperation. This is no simple quarrel over titles. It's a battle for legitimacy, for the right to be taken seriously in a world that worships scholars but relies on craftsmen. For centuries, barbers had shared medical duties with surgeons, cutting flesh, lancing boils, pulling teeth, even assisting in amputations. But as the 16th century wore on, the surgeons wanted distinction. They saw themselves as men of science, not trade. The barbers, in turn, feared being reduced to mere beauticians. "Without us," one barber says, "half this city would die unbled and unshaven. And yet you call us simpletons." The surgeon snorts. "We call you what you are, necessary, but unlearned." Historians still argue whether this rivalry helped or hindered English medicine. Some say it spurred progress by forcing both sides to specialize. Others insist it slowed the healing arts for decades, trapping them in pride and paperwork. Either way, tonight it's a spectacle, like watching two halves of the same man argue over who owns the head. At the edge of the hall stands a quiet figure, gray-haired, calm, observant. His name is Thomas Vickery, the king's surgeon and the unlikely peacemaker between these feuding professions. He raises a hand, and the room stills. "Gentlemen," he begins, "our purpose is not to prove who cuts the finer line, but who serves England best. Let us bind our trades, not divide them. His voice carries the weary authority of a man who's stitched both nobles and beggars. And so, in 1540, under Vicary's urging, King Henry VIII decreed the union of barbers and surgeons into one official body, the Company of Barber Surgeons. For the first time, both razor and scalpel shared a crest. The decree was practical. Surgical knowledge would be organized, apprentices trained, and standards enforced. But the tension never fully vanished. Within the guild walls, barbers grumbled that surgeons acted superior. Surgeons, meanwhile, resented sharing a banner with men who powdered wigs and perfumed beards. You imagine the scene after the meeting ends. Barbers gathering at the alehouse, muttering into their cups about book-learned men with soft hands. One says, "They've never cut a sailor in the dark." Another laughs, "Aye, nor held a lord still while his tooth snapped." Yet for all their resentment, they sense the shift. Medicine is changing. Dissection tables are replacing barber chairs. Latin texts are replacing folk cures. And the barbers, once healers by instinct, must now learn to navigate a world ruled by parchment and hierarchy. You stroll down Cheapside later that week and see the new guild symbol proudly displayed, two crossed razors over a bleeding bowl, crowned with a surgeon's scalpel. It's meant to represent unity, but it looks oddly like a duel frozen mid-swing. Inside one shop, an apprentice recites anatomy terms from a dog-eared book, while his master sharpens blades nearby. "We are educated men now," the master jokes. "If only the patients knew." The apprentice smirks but keeps reading. Change comes slowly, one Latin phrase at a time. By the late 1500s, the company begins organizing public dissections, grim but fascinating spectacles. Tickets are sold, scholars attend. Barbers assist by preparing the bodies, washing the tools, and, when the scholars grow faint, continuing the work themselves. It's a strange compromise, education born from performance, science disguised as theater. You stand at the back of one such demonstration, the air thick with candle smoke and formaldehyde. The surgeon gestures with a scalpel. "Observe the jaw," he says, "and see how it joins the head by this hinge." Thus, when a barber pulls a tooth, he tugs upon the very soul of the face. A few barbers chuckle quietly. They know that hinge better than most scholars ever will. When the body is finally covered, the surgeon nods to a barber to clean the instruments. "Mind the edge," he warns. "A dull blade is a cruel blade." The barber just smiles. "Aye," he says, "but a sharp one's honest." That night, as you leave the hall, the city's noises rise again. Laughter, dogs barking, the steady rhythm of life continuing despite all this newfound professionalism. The Barber Surgeons Union will last almost 2 centuries before splitting once more in 1745, when surgery claims full independence and barbers return to the realm of hair and style. But for now, they coexist, awkwardly, proudly, bound together by royal decree and the simple truth that blood, whether noble or common, stains the same shade of red. As the moon lifts above London, you pass another barber's pole spinning lazily in the breeze. Red for blood, white for bandage, blue for the vein, a tricolor compromise between vanity and vocation. You pause, smiling faintly. In its quiet spiral, you can almost hear the echo of that Guildhall quarrel, two crafts still circling each other through history, neither willing to yield entirely. The next day finds you far from London's polished guild halls, out on the cobblestone edges of the city, where entertainment and agony share the same stage. The air smells of sawdust, roasted chestnuts, and sweat. A crowd gathers around a makeshift platform, cheering and jeering as if a play were about to begin. You edge closer and realize this isn't theater at all. It's a tooth pulling. At the center of the stage stands a man in bright red hose and a feathered cap, his beard waxed to perfection and his grin as wide as the Thames. "Good folk of Smithfield," he bellows. "Today I bring salvation for your sorrows, relief for your rot, and one less tooth for your troubles." The crowd laughs, half in delight, half in dread. This, you realize, is no ordinary barber. He's a tooth drawer, part surgeon, part showman. His trade thrives on spectacle. Pain is the performance, relief is the finale. He waves a gleaming set of iron pincers high above his head. "Who among you dares be Faust?" he calls. The audience parts like the sea, revealing a burly man clutching his jaw. "A brave soul," the barber cries. "And may God grant you courage, or at least numbness." The patient climbs onto the stool as the barber's assistant, dressed like a jester, starts playing a small drum. The rhythm builds suspense. "Now remember," the barber says, "scream if you must, but keep your head still. I've only 2 hands, and one's for flair." You half expect him to pull a rabbit out of a hat, but instead he grips the man's jaw, twists, and crack. A tooth flashes in the sunlight like a pearl of pain. The crowd erupts into cheers and applause. The barber bows deeply, then drops the tooth into a glass jar already half full. "A fine specimen," he declares, "and proof of my art." The patient, pale but grinning through the blood, holds up his coin and shouts, "Worth every penny." Someone in the crowd mutters, "He says that now," and laughter ripples through the square. You can't help noticing how the barber's tools glint like jewels, arranged not for cleanliness but for show. There's a sense of theater in everything he does. His apron bears embroidered suns and moons, his words are rehearsed, his assistant scatters herbs into the air like confetti. Even the pain feels choreographed. Tooth pulling was as much entertainment as medicine in Elizabethan England. Traveling barbers drew crowds in markets and fairs, where people came as much to watch as to heal. In an age before anesthesia, the promise of a swift, confident pull was worth its weight in gold, or at least in gossip. Some of these tooth drawers even doubled as singers or jugglers. They'd toss teeth into the air, catch them in their hats, and boast about their collection of smiles. One famously claimed to have drawn 1,000 teeth in a single summer, though historians still argue whether that was a boast, a lie, or an unfortunate truth. You watch as the barber moves to his next volunteer, a young woman with tears in her eyes but laughter on her lips. "Be gentle," she begs. He smiles theatrically. "Madam, I am always gentle. My tools, alas, are not." The crowd leans forward as he begins again, his movements precise, almost graceful. The tooth comes free with a wet pop, and he holds it aloft like a holy relic. "Behold," he cries, "the enemy vanquished." The spectators cheer wildly. Some even toss coins onto the stage. When the show ends, he sweeps his hat in a grand bow and calls out, "Tell your friends, tell your foes, tell your lovers, pain has a cure, and it travels with me." His assistant beats the drum one last time as they pack up their cart. You approach as the crowd disperses. "Doesn't it trouble you," you ask, "to cause so much pain?" The barber chuckles. "Pain," he repeats. "Friend, pain's the best advertisement we have. No one remembers a quiet healer." He points to the jar of bloody teeth. "Each one of these is a story. A merchant's molar, a baker's bicuspid, a duchess's delicate incisor. They all came to me because I made it quick, and because I made it look good." There's a strange poetry in his logic. In an age of crude medicine, confidence is half the cure. People feared disease but craved spectacle. If suffering must happen, better it be wrapped in laughter and brass. He climbs onto his cart, whistles to his horse, and vanishes into the fog with his assistant still drumming faintly. You stand for a moment in the empty square, the scent of clove oil and sweat lingering in the air. Nearby, a small boy scurries over and picks up a discarded tooth from the ground. "For luck," he says proudly. His mother gasps, snatches it away, and mutters a prayer. You smile despite yourself. Even the smallest things, a tooth, a drumbeat, a moment of courage, become part of the strange pageantry of Elizabethan life. Later that night, as you pass by another barber's pole spinning lazily in the lamplight, you realize something. The barber's craft was never just about healing. It was about control, the power to turn fear into fascination, to make people watch their pain and call it entertainment. And perhaps that's what keeps you awake long after the streets grow quiet. The knowledge that in a world of superstition and sickness, the bravest healers were also the boldest performers. They sold relief by the handful, pain by the minute, and hope by the smile. The next morning dawns overcast, the Thames shrouded in mist thick enough to taste. You wander through the twisting alleys of London, still hearing phantom drum beats from yesterday's tooth-pulling spectacle. But this time, the sound comes not from a crowd, it comes from behind closed shutters and barred doors. Inside one of those dim rooms, a different kind of pain hums. A nobleman sits rigid in a chair carved with lions, his hand gripping the armrest hard enough to whiten his knuckles. His jaw is swollen, his breath foul with infection. Standing beside him, dressed not in red hose but in a black velvet coat, is a barber surgeon of the elite sort, reserved for the upper crust who would never dare mingle with market crowds. "Open, my lord," the barber murmurs, his tone low and rehearsed. "It will be over soon." You can almost hear the lie in his voice. Here, the barber's work takes on a new character, less performance, more pretense. No laughter, no cheering crowd. Only the scent of candle wax and clove, and the faint trickle of blood onto lace cuffs. He works with instruments finer than those in the fairground, slender forceps, polished steel mirrors, even a rare powder imported from Venice, said to dull pain. It doesn't. The nobleman winces, gasps, and then, nothing but a muffled sob. The barber stands straight, tooth in hand, and places it neatly into a silver bowl. "You see, my lord," he says softly, "the offending spirit is gone." Because even here, superstition lingers like smoke. Many Elizabethans still believe toothaches were caused by toothworms, or by sin seeping through the gums. Some barbers swore they'd seen tiny serpents wriggling out of extracted molars, though historians still argue whether those stories were genuine belief or good marketing. You linger in the doorway, unseen, watching how the nobleman's servants rush forward with a goblet of wine and a wad of linen. The barber wipes his tools clean, murmuring a prayer under his breath, half habit, half insurance. Then he turns and catches sight of you. "Curious, aren't you?" he says, his tone not unkind. "We make kings weep and beggars laugh. Strange profession." He walks over to a small cabinet and opens it, revealing rows of neatly labeled jars. Some hold extracted teeth, others powdered herbs, camphor, sage, and what looks like crushed pearls. Each one an experiment, he explains. Every mouth tells a story. But what most don't realize is that we're fighting time itself. Rot waits for no man. He speaks of plague years when barbers had to pull teeth by the dozens, often while praying the black swellings wouldn't follow. Of winter nights when rich clients begged him to bleed them, certain that draining a pint of bad humor would spare their lives. You imagine the fear that hung over every home, every bedchamber, every street. In that world, the barber's trade was both comfort and curse. Comfort, because it offered an answer, any answer, to pain. Curse, because the answers were rarely right. And yet, the barber thrives. You can sense his quiet pride as he polishes a scalpel until it gleams. Physicians talk, he mutters. We act. A man comes in with pain, we remove it. That's all there is to it. It's an oddly modern sentiment, pragmatic and detached. He doesn't speak of humors or spirits or worms. Just pain and the means to end it. You realize he's not the charlatan the stage barbers are. He's a craftsman in an era that barely understands craft. Outside, the bells of St. Paul's toll the hour, shaking the glass panes. The nobleman groans, clutching his jaw, but relief begins to soften his face. The barber notices and smiles faintly. "There," he says. "Soon you'll dine again, my lord. Perhaps not on apples." When you leave his chamber, the city feels different, quieter, somehow. You pass by stalls selling clove buds and vinegar, remedies hawked as miracle tooth tonics. A young apprentice waves a bottle at you. "Guaranteed to cure any ache," he shouts. You ask what's in it. He grins. "Mostly hope." Further down the street, you see another barber setting up shop, painting his striped pole with fresh red and white. He whistles as he works, dipping the brush in thick paint that drips like blood. The symbolism hits you again: life, death, healing, bleeding, all swirling together in a spiral that never quite stops. By evening, the fog thickens until even torchlight looks tired. You find yourself back in the poorer quarter, where a woman hums to her child outside a crooked doorway. She's missing half her teeth, but her song is steady. When she catches you watching, she shrugs. "Pulled 'em last winter," she says proudly. "Couldn't afford the fancy man, so I went to a barber on Fleet Street. He said it'd hurt less if I sang." You smile, uncertain whether to laugh or wince. She pats her cheek and adds, "Still hums when it rains." Everywhere you turn, echoes of this strange profession linger. In the smiles, the scars, the jars of teeth that sit on shelves like trophies. The barbers of the Elizabethan world were more than medics. They were custodians of courage, merchants of mortality, and artists of agony. As you drift through the night streets, you realize how thin the line was between healer and performer, between science and superstition. Some men wielded blades for status, others for show, but all of them, in one way or another, sold relief to a world aching for it. And beneath every blood-stained apron, every silver bowl of teeth, you sense a deeper truth. The Elizabethan barber wasn't just moonlighting as a dentist. He was trying, in the only way he knew, to keep death waiting just one moment longer. The rain falls like a whisper, soft and relentless, washing the grime from London's crooked roofs. You pull your cloak tighter and step carefully through the puddled streets, following the faint glow of lamplight toward the banks of the Thames. Somewhere ahead, music drifts through the fog, flutes, laughter, and the low hum of conversation. It leads you to an inn called the Golden Comb, where barbers and surgeons often gather after a long day of cutting, bleeding, and pulling. Inside, the air is thick with the smell of ale and smoke. You spot a dozen men hunched over wooden tables, their aprons still stained with the day's work. One raises a mug and calls out, "To the patient who didn't faint." The room bursts into laughter. Another chimes in, "And to the one who paid first." You can't help smiling as you settle into a corner. Here, the professional veneer peels away, revealing the weary humor of men who spend their days elbow deep in other people's pain. "Rough business, isn't it?" says a barber sitting nearby. His hands are steady but scarred, his eyes rimmed red from candle smoke. Folk think it's glamour, what with the red poles and the fancy razors. But truth is, we do the work no one else does. He swirls his drink thoughtfully. "You know, the surgeons mock us, the physicians ignore us, and the apothecaries undercut us. But when a man's tooth screams louder than his prayers, who does he call?" He taps his chest. "Us." Around him, others nod in agreement. One pulls out a pouch of herbs and tosses it onto the table. "Camphor and mustard," he says. "Rub it on the gums before you pull. dulls the pain, at least enough for them to stop cursing your name. Another leans in, his voice low. Ever try henbane? Dangerous stuff, but it'll knock a man senseless if you brew it right. The others murmur knowingly. You catch the glint of curiosity and fear. Even in this crowd of practical men, the line between remedy and poison is thin. One younger barber, eager to impress, claims he saw a Moorish healer in Seville who used a heated iron needle to kill the tooth spirit before extraction. The others scoff, though one admits he's tried it once. Didn't work, he confesses. But the smell scared off everyone else in the queue. You laugh quietly into your cup. There's something deeply human in this mixture of confidence and desperation, a brotherhood of men improvising their way through history, wielding blades and bravado in equal measure. At the next table, a barber named Gideon recounts the story of a noblewoman who offered him a ruby ring if he could save her aching tooth without pulling it. "So what did you do?" someone asks. Gideon grins. "I cleaned it, prayed over it, sprinkled it with rose water, and told her I'd banish the worm. She paid double." The others cheer and bang their mugs. "To the worm," they shout in unison. As the laughter fades, you notice a quieter figure in the corner, a gray-haired barber scribbling notes into a leather-bound book. "That's Master Rowe," whispers your neighbor. "Writes everything down. Says one day people will call this a science." You approach him, curious. His handwriting is neat, his diagrams detailed, sketches of teeth, gums, and the human jaw, labeled with Latin and guesswork. "You study this?" you ask. He nods slowly. "I tried to. There's order in everything, even pain. The trouble is, no one listens. They think I'm mad for measuring molars instead of counting coins." You glance at his notes again, his charting tooth decay by age, diet, and season. Primitive, yes, but undeniably scientific. "Historians still argue," he says softly, "whether we barbers were fools or pioneers. I prefer to think we were both." He closes the book and smiles faintly. "We were men standing at the edge of darkness, trimming it back one jaw at a time." You sit with that thought as the night wears on. The barbers grow louder, their laughter slurred, their boasts taller. Someone sings a bawdy ballad about a barber who accidentally shaved a bishop bald, and the whole howls with laughter. Yet beneath the jokes lies a current of weariness. You can see it in their shoulders, their calloused hands, their haunted eyes. Because for every tooth they pull, another rots. For every pain they cure, 10 more wait in line. Their world is one of endless demand and imperfect tools, a constant battle against decay. Near midnight, the door creaks open and a young apprentice rushes in, breathless. "Master Rudd," he gasps. "There's a sailor at the docks, his jaw's gone black. They're calling for you." Without hesitation, a man at the bar throws on his cloak and grabs his kit. "No rest for the weary," he mutters, and disappears into the rain. The room quiets. For a moment, no one speaks. Then, as if nothing happened, someone refills a mug and begins humming a tune. You sit there, feeling the strange rhythm of their lives, the alternating pulse of drink and dread, laughter and loss. And you realize this is what it means to be an Elizabethan barber dentist, to live between comedy and catastrophe, with a razor in one hand and a prayer in the other. Outside, the rain thickens into a steady sheet, hammering against the shutters. The world is dark and damp and endless. But inside the golden comb, the light flickers warm and defiant. You raise your mug quietly in a toast no one hears, to the men who cut, who bled, who pulled, and who kept smiling through it all. By dawn, the storm has passed. The Thames gleams like dull pewter under a pale sky, and you find yourself drawn toward the sound of metal clinking and brushes scrubbing. It's another day, and the barbers are already at work, washing their tools, sharpening their blades, opening shop doors to the waking city. You stop at a stall near Cheapside, where a young barber apprentice polishes his master's instruments with almost religious care. Every tooth tells a tale, he mutters, though he's barely 16. You ask what he means. He points to the small wooden chest beside him, its lid open to reveal an unsettling collection. A set of molars strung on cord like pale beads, some cracked, some hollowed with decay. My master keeps them as lessons, the boy explains. Each one reminds him how not to make the same mistake twice. It's a strange kind of education, half craft, half superstition. You can't help noticing how the boy glances nervously at the chest, as if the teeth might whisper back. A few streets away, London's grander barbers are preparing for something more formal, the weekly inspection by the Barber Surgeons' Company. Founded by royal charter under Henry VIII, it still wields enormous authority, setting standards for who may bleed, cut, or even hold a razor in public. You follow the boy and his master to the company's hall, a stately stone building marked with a crest showing, naturally, a bleeding arm. Inside, the atmosphere hums with tension and ambition. Rows of barbers stand at attention while a panel of stone-faced surgeons reviews their work. You catch snippets of conversation. Steady hand, that one. Too slow on the incision. Fine extraction, minimal damage to the gum. The master beside you leans close. They call this progress, he whispers, but it feels more like theater. On a central table lies a wax model of the human mouth, an expensive teaching aid imported from Italy. One of the examiners points to it with a long stick, lecturing about anatomy and infection. The teeth, he declares, are not isolated things. They are branches of the same tree as the brain. A bad tooth can rot the mind. A few of the younger barbers exchange glances, half skeptical, half curious. Historians still argue whether such anatomical lectures were based on knowledge or pure guesswork. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. After the examination, the master barbers gather in the courtyard, shaking off the tension. Next they'll be telling us to wear wigs and call ourselves doctors. One grumbles. The others laugh, but not too loudly. Some of them secretly want that respect. They dream of a future where their trade will be called dentistry, not a sideline to shaving. As you linger near the gate, you notice a wooden board nailed to the wall. On it, written in neat script, are the company's new rules. No barber shall draw a tooth without proper tools. No tooth shall be extracted upon the Sabbath. No barber shall charge a nobleman more than thrice the common rate. You can't help smirking. The first two make sense. The third? Pure fantasy. Back in the streets, business resumes as if the inspection never happened. The master barber from before sets up his stool by a window, the red and white pole gleaming outside. A merchant enters, pale and sweating, clutching his jaw. "Ah, another brave soul," the barber murmurs, gesturing to the chair. "Tell me, which one troubles you?" The merchant groans. "The back. Feels like it's hammering my skull." The barber nods and opens his kit, revealing the gleaming pelican, a cruel-looking device shaped like a bird's beak. "Hold still," he says. "You'll feel a pinch." Of course, it's never just a pinch. You wince as the metal clamps down, the merchant's knuckles whiten, and then, crack. The barber drops the tooth into a bowl of vinegar and wipes his hands clean. "There," he says cheerfully. "Good as new. Don't eat anything hard for a week, or ever again, if you can help it." When the patient leaves, the barber sighs and slumps into his chair. "Do you know what I dream of?" he says to no one in particular. "A way to stop the pain before it starts. A salve, a potion, anything that spares them the scream." You can hear the fatigue in his voice. For all their bravado, the barbers carry the weight of every cry, every failure. Their trade is physical, relentless, and profoundly human. A few decades from now, true dentistry will begin to emerge, rooted in anatomy, hygiene, and anesthesia. But here, in Elizabethan London, the barber's hands are the frontier. As the day wanes, you wander down Fleet Street and pause before a shop displaying a new invention, a glass mirror. You catch your reflection, your jaw, your teeth, and wonder what it must feel like to trust those fragile bones to another person's hands. Above you, the striped pole spins slowly in the wind, red bleeding into white, white into red. It's hypnotic. Eternal. You realize the pole is more than decoration. It's a silent confession, a swirl of life and death wound tightly together. The barbers have lived by that rhythm for centuries, walking the narrow line between care and cruelty, science and showmanship. And perhaps that's why, even as their world begins to change, their symbol never does. By now, the air feels heavier, as though London itself is exhaling after years of holding its breath. You wander through lanes slick with rain, the scent of rosemary and smoke still clinging to the air. The barber shops are quieter tonight. The shouting, the laughter, even the screams have dimmed to murmurs. The city is changing, and you can feel it. You pause at a small shop tucked between a bookseller and a perfumer, its window filled not with razors or leeches, but tiny sketches, delicate diagrams of teeth and skulls, drawn in careful ink. A wooden sign above the door reads, "Barber Surgeon and Dental Specialist." The term is new, experimental, a little boastful. But you can sense ambition in every letter. Inside, candles flicker over rows of tools finer than you've ever seen. Thin steel probes, polished mirrors, even what looks like a primitive drill turned by a foot pedal. The man behind the counter, dressed neatly in grey linen, greets you with a nod. "You're not here for a shave, are you?" he says, a twinkle of irony in his eye. You shake your head, and he chuckles. Few are, these days. The gentry prefer clean faces and quiet mouths. It's the teeth they fear now, the hidden rot, the whispers of decay. He moves toward the window, lifting a small wooden model of a jaw. "Do you see?" he says, tapping one tooth gently. "They're like soldiers. Lose one, and the line collapses." There's something almost reverent in the way he speaks. Gone is the swagger of the marketplace barber. In its place stands a kind of scholar, still rough-edged, but thoughtful. "Some call me a dreamer," he admits. "But I've been keeping notes. Pain, swelling, infection. I think the key is not just the tooth, but what lies beneath." He gestures to a small journal filled with observations, sketches of nerves, sketches of roots, diagrams copied from Italian medical books. "The Italians are far ahead," he sighs. "They've begun calling it dentatura. Imagine that, a science of teeth." You smile. Doesn't sound like much of a crowd pleaser. He laughs softly. "Oh, it isn't. No drums, no cheers. But perhaps one day, people will come to us not for a show, but for silence." Outside, a horse clatters past, and for a moment, the sound of hooves echoes like a heartbeat. The barber grows thoughtful. "Sometimes," he says, "I wonder if we barbers have always been performers out of necessity. People fear pain. They fear death. So we turned our work into theater, made it bright and noisy, to keep the darkness at bay." You glance around the quiet shop, and it feels almost sacred. "And now?" you ask. "Now," he says, "the performance changes. We trade spectacle for study." He opens a small box on the counter and shows you something unexpected, a set of false teeth carved from ivory, mounted on gold wire. "A nobleman's commission," he explains. "He can't chew. but he can smile again. I suppose that counts for something. You lift the dentures, surprisingly heavy in your hand. They are crude, yes, but ingenious. Historians still argue, he says quietly, whether vanity or necessity birthed dentistry. I think it was both. He lights another candle and hands you a seat near the window. You'd be surprised how much the world changes when people start to value appearances. A smile, after all, is power. As night deepens, another customer enters, a young woman clutching her jaw, clearly in pain. The barber greets her gently, offers her a chair, and asks her to open her mouth. "Ah," he murmurs, "an abscess. I can drain it, but it will hurt." She nods, pale but resolute. "Do it." The barber rolls up his sleeves and begins to work, his movements slow, deliberate, almost tender. You can see the strain in his face, not from disgust, but from empathy. He whispers as he works, explaining each step as if to reassure her. When it's done, he rinses her mouth with wine and presses a coin into her hand. "For the walk home," he says softly. "And for your courage." She leaves smiling faintly, and the barber exhales. "We never get used to it," he says. "But at least now, we try to understand it." You sit quietly for a while, watching him tidy his instruments. The blood, the pain, the superstition, all of it feels a world away from the drum-beating tooth drawers of earlier days. The profession has grown older, wiser, wearier. Before you leave, he nods toward the striped pole outside, its colors dulled by the rain. "We still keep it," he says. "Reminds us where we came from. Red for blood, white for healing, blue for faith. Without all three, we're just men with knives." As you step out into the street, you notice other poles spinning faintly in the night wind, each one a tiny beacon of transformation. Behind those doors, barbers still shave and bleed, but now, some study, some sketch, some dream. The trade is splitting, evolving, branching toward something new. You walk on, the city's hum wrapping around you. Somewhere in the distance, a market vendor calls out, a lute plays a soft tune, and a bell tolls for evening prayer. You realize the barbers of London have begun their quiet revolution, not with grand declarations or royal decrees, but with ink-stained fingers, steady hands, and a longing to make sense of suffering. It's not glamorous. It's not loud. But it's the start of something that will one day be called progress. The next evening, the city hums like a living thing, soft, weary, and full of secrets. You wander down Fleet Street once more, past taverns spilling candlelight and laughter onto the cobbles. The smell of roasting meat mingles with the faint tang of clove oil, and there it is again, that familiar striped pole, spinning lazily in the mist. You pause before it, your reflection trembling in the rainwater pooled at your feet. The red and white blur together, hypnotic, endless. It's hard to believe how much that symbol has seen, how much it's survived. Inside, a barber hums quietly to himself as he sharpens a razor. The room is warm, lined with shelves of neatly labeled jars. You recognize the mix of old and new, the iron pincers beside polished mirrors, the bleeding bowl resting next to an anatomical sketch. He glances up as you enter and smiles. "Back again," he says. "You're either curious or cursed." You laugh softly. "A bit of both, I think." He sets down the razor and gestures toward the chair. "Sit, then. You might as well learn something." You do. And as he works, snipping, talking, polishing, you realize he's less a barber now and more a philosopher with scissors. "Strange thing," he says, "how the world changes faster than our hands can follow. One year, I'm a barber. Next, they call me surgeon. Now, dentist. I suppose by next century, they'll say I was all three and none at all." He chuckles at his own thought, eyes half-lidded with nostalgia. We barbers have always lived between titles, too practical for priests, too bloody for doctors. But that's where life happens, isn't it? Between things. You watch as he pours warm water over his tools, steam rising like ghostly breath. Do you miss the old ways? You ask. He tilts his head. Sometimes. The noise, the crowds, the foolish confidence of it all. But no, truth be told, I prefer the quiet. These days, we fix more than we ruin. That feels like progress. He dries his hands and leans against the counter, staring at the candlelight flickering in the mirror. When I was an apprentice, he says softly, my master told me the pole outside isn't a symbol of pride. It's a confession. You frown slightly. A confession of what? That we've hurt people, he replies. Cut too deep, pulled too soon, believed too much. But also that we tried to make sense of suffering before anyone else dared to touch it. You sit in silence, the words settling like dust. Outside, a boy runs past selling pamphlets. The headlines shout of plague fears, of royal decrees, of some new foreign science promising miracles. The world is restless. But in here, everything feels still. The barber picks up a small ivory tooth from his table, a perfect replica, carved by hand. I made this for a lady once, he says. She'd lost hairs in childbirth. Said she couldn't smile at her child without it. Strange, isn't it? How something so small can hold so much of who we are. He turns it in his fingers, then places it back down with care. One day, he murmurs, they'll look back at us and laugh, the bleeding, the leeches, the pelicans. But maybe they'll also understand that we were trying to help in the only language we had. The candle flickers lower. You can hear the faint rain tapping the window, the slow breathing of the city outside. Will you keep the pole? You ask finally. He smiles faintly. Of course. Every barber does. It's our thread through time. Red for the blood we spilled, white for the bandages we wrapped, blue for the veins that still pulse beneath it all. As long as it turns, we remember where we came from. You step back out into the street. The pole spins slowly behind you, and the rain turns the cobblestones into mirrors. The reflection ripples, red, white, blue, like a promise half whispered by history itself. You walk on, through the sleeping city that once cheered for blood and now prays for balm. The night smells of wet stone and cloves. Somewhere, a church bell tolls midnight. Somewhere else, another barber shutters his shop, snuffs his candle, and hangs his apron by the door. The world is moving on, but the rhythm remains, the heartbeat of care and curiosity, the strange faith that hands can heal even when hearts still falter. You take one last look at the dimly glowing poles along the street. Each one a flicker of memory, a fragment of a profession that began with blades and ended with smiles. And you can't help but think, in their own way, those barbers were the first dreamers of comfort. The first to believe that pain could be lessened, that beauty could be restored, that care could be both practical and kind. Perhaps they didn't know it, but in the hum of their razors and the clang of their basins, they were whispering something timeless. This, too, can be mended. The streets fade as you walk, their edges softening like a dream losing shape. The air grows gentler now, cool and forgiving, carrying the faintest hint of lavender from some unseen garden. You find yourself slowing, your steps quieter, your breath deeper. The noise of London falls away, the cries of the vendors, the laughter from taverns, even the ringing bells, all dim to a hush. Only the faint drip of rain remains, steady and comforting. Somewhere in the distance, you imagine a barber's pole still turning, its colors blurring into one pale streak in the night. Not blood and bandages anymore, just motion, memory, and meaning. You think of the hands that once held those blades, trembling or sure, and the countless faces that passed through their doors. Pain and trust, mingled in equal measure. It's easy to forget how much courage it takes, not just to cut, but to care. The mist gathers low along the ground, wrapping you in a cool blanket of quiet. The cobblestones gleam faintly, and the city exhales one long, tired sigh. You breathe with it, letting go of the centuries, the noise, the ache. Letting the story settle where all old stories belong, in that gentle place between sleep and memory. So, if your mind still hums with the sounds of clinking tools and murmured prayers, that's all right. They'll fade soon enough. Just listen instead to the rain outside your window, steady as breath, soft as peace. And when your eyelids grow heavy, remember, even in the roughest hands, there once lived the hope of healing. Good night, dreamer. Rest easy.